Welcome to Legal Lines. My name is Tom O'Shea, the host of this program brought to you by the York County Bar Foundation. Tonight's topic is a very serious topic. It's child abuse awareness. October happens to be Child Abuse Awareness Month. And my guest is attorney Wanda Neuhaus. Welcome, Wanda.
Thank you. Good evening.
And Wanda is one of the solicitors for the York County Office of Children, Youth, and Families, correct?
Correct.
And I said it correct.
You did say it correctly.
By the way, the agency was known as Children and Youth Services. I will occasionally slip and call it Children and Youth Services, or sometimes CYS. But the correct name right now is Children, Youth, and Families.
Correct.
Can you tell us the reason that it has the new name?
The reason it has the new name is because we have developed across the state a more open view of what children, youth, and families is supposed to do, not just to provide services to children and youth, but to include the families and services to the families to make the entire unit more healthy.
Okay. And Wanda is a local attorney who has a private practice, but also she is one of the solicitors for Children and Youth Services, Children, Youth, and Families. And what does that mean, that you're one of the solicitors?
Basically, anytime there is any legal action required by York County Children, Youth, and Families, we need to present that to the court, and they need to have an attorney do that on their behalf. And that's what the solicitor will do, as well as appearing at any hearings or even help with meetings, drafting documents, that type of thing.
Okay. And I assume a large portion of your practice has to deal with working with that agency.
That's correct.
Okay. And exactly what is the role of the agency?
The agency is mandated by the state to investigate child abuse if there is a referral, to then make a determination whether the child is safe in that home as a result of the allegations. If the child is not safe, to petition the court for the removal of the child from that family and the home while services are implemented for the goal of reunification. If the child can be maintained safely in the home, then services will be implemented to make sure that indeed that child is safe. Or if we're on the more fortunate side and there is nothing to go forward with the referral, then to make it an unfounded and wish the family well.
Okay. Now you're speaking of referrals. This would be referrals of suspected child abuse?
Correct.
Okay. Now, if a citizen believes that a child is being abused, is there a number that they should call? How do they contact the agency?
Okay. They can make a call to two places. One would be Childline, which is run by the Department of Public Welfare. And the other number would be to make a direct referral to York County Children, Youth, and Families. That number is area code 717-846-8496.
Okay, and the hotline number, I have it written here.
You have it, thank you.
Is 1-800-932-0313.
Correct.
So that would be the Pennsylvania hotline number for
correct.
For suspected child abuse.
Correct.
Okay. Now, anyone who suspects child abuse should be able to call this number, correct?
That's correct.
And if any citizen calls, do they remain anonymous?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Okay. To the agency, if they wish to give their name, they can always determine that they want to make an anonymous referral. The difficulty with anonymous referrals is obviously if we don't have someone to contact to get some basic information, we're sort of left doing the investigation totally from scratch. If we have a referral name, that gives us a step up because we can then make an initial contact with the referral source. However, other than the agency and their solicitor, obviously, the referral source is always confidential. I don't care how many people ask. I don't care in what context they ask. The referral source is always confidential.
So, for example, if someone reported a neighbor, but they didn't want their neighbor to know they were
correct.
The reporter, the people at Children and Youth Services might know the name, but it would not be released to the suspect.
To anyone.
Anyone.
To anyone.
Okay.
Even if the case would go to court at some point. If someone asks the question, well, who made that referral? The court will immediately inject that is not something that you are allowed to discover.
Okay. So if there is someone suspects a child of being abused, the proper thing for them to do is to call one of those two numbers.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I understand that there are certain people who are mandated reporters.
Correct.
And can you explain that?
A mandated reporter is anyone who, in their employment, in their profession, and in the practice of their profession, deals with children. So it's a very broad definition, as you can see. Physicians, anyone in that physician's office or hospital staff who actually deals with the children, from the triage nurse who simply takes down the information for admission to the person who does the treatment. Any of those people are mandated reporters. Anyone in the school who deals on a day-to-day basis with a child, the teacher, the school administration, even maybe a coach. That may not be a teacher, but is a coaching person hired by the school. Any child care providers, a daycare center, anybody who works for the daycare center. Obviously, any other social worker, any law enforcement. Law enforcement is a mandated reporter, anybody who would come in contact with an abused child. All of those people are what we call mandated reporters, and basically what that means is if they have a reasonable belief that child abuse has occurred, they are required by law to make the referral. And if they do not, there are actually penalties in the law for their failure to make that report. Now, what many of the organizations, such as schools or hospitals, have done is they have developed a procedure where if, for example, a child comes into the emergency room, the person who's doing the admission sees bruises or something that, or the way the parent treats the child during the admission process, they normally have an assigned person or group of people who actually make the referral. So they would then send the information to that contact person. The contact person will then make the referral. And with a mandated referral, after the initial verbal to Childline or Children and Youth, they then have to follow up with a written document. We're going to call it a CY-47 because that's the form name that it gives it. But it's simply identifying child, identifying parents, identifying what the abuse is, identifying any alleged perpetrator. You know, if it was, for example, mom and father brought the child in, but the daycare person was the alleged perpetrator, that person will be listed.
Okay. There's a definition of abuse that your agency has to go by. Is that correct?
Correct.
And can you explain what that definition is?
Okay. There are three basic types of abuse: physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. The one that's probably the hardest for the community to understand is the definition of physical abuse, because obviously if we feel a small child has a number of bruises to their face or other places, we believe a child shouldn't have bruises. It's not like one who's running and has them on their knees or legs. That is not, unfortunately, the definition of physical abuse. Physical abuse, according to the statute, is serious bodily injury. And how they define serious bodily injury is that could cause death or impairs function or causes severe pain. So if the injury doesn't rise to that level, by law that is not physical abuse. Now, does that mean the agency will not get involved? Well, not necessarily. It just means we will not have an indicated report of abuse. We may believe that they are suspicious, and as a result, the family is in need of services to make sure the child is safe. And we could then do that on a more informal basis and offer them services such as parenting skills classes, anger management classes, that type of thing.
Okay, but you also mentioned sexual abuse and emotional abuse.
Correct. Sexual abuse is obviously any type of inappropriate sexual touching, but it also includes photographing, more a pornography type of thing, selling, taking pictures of children in sexual provocative ways. That would be sexual abuse. And keep in mind that in any of these abuse definitions, it is not only the act of doing that, it is an omission or failure to act to provide for a child's safety. So, for example, if a parent or some other caretaker knows that a spouse or a friend or whoever is inappropriately touching the child and doesn't do something to make that child safe, that person can be what we call a perpetrator by omission of sexual abuse. Emotional abuse is very, very difficult to prove and is going to require an expert witness, such as a psychiatrist or psychologist. And basically what it entails is, because of behaviors of the caretaker, they have caused mental health issues with the child. They have made them depressed, made them oppositional, post-traumatic stress disorder, that type of thing. That is a very specific type of abuse, and really that is the one that requires real professional testimony.
Okay. And with respect to abuse in any of those categories, I believe that you can have neglect being considered abuse.
Correct.
That would be, for example, a situation where somebody leaves an infant alone at home for hours on end.
Correct. And that would be under the category of the person who failed to act, and they could lead to serious bodily injury. For example, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old are left at home while parent goes grocery shopping or whatever, and the child decides they're hungry and tries to cook on the stove and practically burns down the apartment because he's left unsupervised. That would also be a form of abuse and neglect.
What happens when someone makes the phone call after the phone call is made with suspected abuse? What does the agency do in response to that phone call?
The agency needs to determine exactly what type of referral it is. If it is one that is what I'm going to call an emergency, we actually call it a CPS, which means Child Protective Services referral, versus a General Protective Services referral. If it's a Child Protective Services, that means it is some sort of abuse. There is immediate danger or harm potentially for the child. That requires the agency to initially make a safety check. Within 24 hours of receiving the referral, they must visit and see the child. Do some preliminary investigation to find out if that child is safe. If they determine the child is safe, then the child will remain where the child is, with a parent, with a guardian, whoever, and they will continue to conduct the investigation. If at the conclusion of that first visit, they determine that child is not safe, that the alleged perpetrator is in the home, the other parent cannot provide safety for that child, then the agency has to make a determination whether it is necessary to remove that child from the family. That is then when the courts get involved. Up to this point, it's all agency-driven.
And if it is an emergency matter where the court gets involved, how quickly does the court have to act?
Emergency. What happens is, if it's, for example, 3 o'clock in the morning, we have to be on call 24 hours a day. Our juvenile judges are also on call 24 hours a day. And basically at 3 o'clock in the morning, if we get a phone call saying this child is not safe, one of the judges is getting a call.
Okay. Wanda, I'm going to interrupt you there because we're about to take a break. This is Legal Lines. My guest is attorney Wanda Neuhaus. Welcome back to Legal Lines. My name is Tom O'Shea. Today's program is Child Abuse Awareness. My guest is attorney Wanda Neuhaus, who is one of the solicitors for the York County Office of Children, Youth, and Families formerly known as Children and Youth Services. Welcome back, Wanda.
Thank you.
And before the break, we were speaking about what happens once a phone call is made of a suspected child abuse case, and we were talking about the emergency process. But you indicated that there are two types of cases, one which is viewed as an emergency and the other which is abuse is suspected, but it's not viewed to be an emergency where action needs to be made within 24 hours.
Okay. Normally with a GPS or General Protective Services, there normally is not the same type of referral. It may not be that there is serious injury. It may not rise to one of those definitions I gave earlier. But it could be parent-child conflict. Child is running away. That obviously is something that we need to be concerned about because the child's not safe on the streets. But it's not at the same level of emergency as a Child Protective Services where there's abuse. As a result of that, the agency still does an investigation. However, it is not on the same timeline, where they have to be out within 24 hours of the initial referral if it's abusive. They have approximately a week. I mean, we obviously try to get out as soon as possible, but for example, if we have 10 emergencies come in on one day and 2 non-emergencies, we know which ones are going to be dealt with first. And basically, it's the same thing for both of those. You go out, assess the situation, try to determine what the major factors are as you start your investigation. And the investigation then is to determine, are those allegations true? And do they reach the level of abuse as I've talked about before? If you believe that the allegations are true, that something happened, then you have another question to ask. You may, quote unquote, substantiate the fact that the incident occurred, but it may not rise to the level of abuse. So as a result, you're then going to have an unfounded finding. Because the goal, I shouldn't even say the goal, but the end result of a referral is that after the investigation, the caseworker who's doing the investigation from the agency, their supervisor, any person who's involved in that, has to make a determination. Is it an unfounded report, meaning it didn't happen, or it doesn't reach abuse? Is it an indicated report? Indicated means that the agency believes it happened, they believe that it does meet the level of abuse, and there's an indicated finding. Now, what's the importance of an indicated finding? Well, if anybody's ever had to do child line clearances and criminal clearances for a job, for example, that is a child line clearance. If you go back and 5 years ago you were indicated as a perpetrator of child abuse, you will have on the child line registry, where they do the child line check, an indicated report, which could negatively impact on your ability to get certain types of jobs. Mm-hmm. Now, if it's unfounded, then that means the entire case is expunged. There will be nothing on the registry record. Even the agency must unfound and expunge their entire record. Now, not that it happened. There's going to be a notation that on such and such a day a referral was given and what the nature of that referral is, but any of the details are gone. The other potential finding is a founded finding. That is a very specific thing. Basically, what has to happen with a founded finding is a court has made a determination that the abuse occurred. That court can either be the juvenile court, i.e. if we have to file a motion to remove the child, or a criminal court. If criminal charges sort of coincide with the alleged abuse and the trial happens in the criminal case and there is a guilty verdict or a guilty plea, then that is determined as a founded report of abuse. A founded report of abuse cannot be appealed to the Department of Public Welfare. That is determined by the court and would have to go through the normal appellate procedures in court. An indicated report is, however, appealable to the Department of Public Welfare, at which point the agency would then present their evidence of why they indicated the report to the Department of Public Welfare, and they would have to determine whether that indicated finding should stand or if it should be dismissed and made unfounded.
Okay, now, going back to the initial contact, the phone call, if you will, where someone reports suspected child abuse. is there a time limit for when the report needs to be completed?
Yes. The agency has 30 to 60 days. They obviously like to get them finished as soon as possible. But, for example, if there are serious medical injuries to the child that are going to require more testing by the medical personnel, or the child is hospitalized for a number of days, that's just not going to be completed within 30 days. So they have 30 to 60 days to complete their investigation.
Now, once the report is completed, who receives a copy?
Initially, everyone who is involved, every parent as well as the alleged perpetrator and the person who made the referral, gets a letter saying that a referral has been made and investigation will be completed. Those same persons will get a report at the end saying that we have completed our investigation and that it is an indicated finding or an unfounded finding. That then sets in motion for the alleged perpetrator their ability to file an appeal to the public welfare.
Okay. So if there's let's say there's an indicated finding,
Correct.
What happens then?
Well, it depends. If there's an indicated finding and there's no appeal to the Department of Public Welfare, then that will stay on the registry as an indicated finding. Now, what does that mean? Well, it depends on who the alleged perpetrator is. If the alleged perpetrator is a person who has responsibility to care for the child, and as a result, the agency and the court, because ultimately the decision is the court, determines that that child is not safe in the home around the alleged perpetrator, it is possible that that child will be removed from the home, placed either with other relatives or in foster care, while services are provided to help the safety in the home.
So let's say that the perpetrator is found to be a member of the household. Let's
Correct.
say that the perpetrator is a parent or a step-parent.
Okay.
And that is a member of the household. What happens to the child in that situation?
Depends. The question then you have to ask is it possible to keep the child in the home and remove the perpetrator? Is there a possibility that the perpetrator would leave? Well, that also means that the other parent has to be able to provide safety for the child. If the other parent isn't quite sure whether the abuse occurred or whether this person committed it, there's a real question whether they can provide safety for the child. And as a result, in that circumstance, the child will probably be removed and placed either in foster care or with another family member. If, on the other hand, the parent very strongly believes, yes, I know what happened, we're going to work on getting it better, and I will provide for this child, I will not allow the alleged perpetrator around the child or only in supervised circumstances, then a safety plan is developed and that child remains in the home and services and the safety plan go forward. And the goal is, if it is indeed the party's desire, to work the alleged perpetrator back into the home, if that's what they want. I mean, we're never going to tell them they have to have them reunited, but if their goal is to be a family unit, we then provide services so that they can work on the issues that led to the abuse and reunite as a family.
I want to talk about the services in a minute, but right now we're back to the hearing, and you indicated that if it's found that there is not a safe place at the home for the child, or that you can't guarantee the child's safety in the home, you look at either foster care or alternate placement.
Correct.
And that could be other family members.
Other family members, close family friends. Let's say, for example, Joey is found out at 1 o'clock in the morning, 5 years old, wandering the streets because mother is using drugs. When we would place that child at 1 o'clock in the morning, we would try to, if we can find mother, ask, is there anybody else? Or maybe little Joey. Little Joey says, well, Grandma lives down the block. We would go contact Grandma. Now, we have to do a real quick check, make sure she has no criminal or child line checks. We would also check her home. At 1 o'clock in the morning, those are going to be very brief, and we may allow the child to just stay there overnight and run everything the next morning. But the idea is, and the hope is, that we will be able to find a family member or a close family friend. You know, maybe the child has a babysitter that he spends a lot of time with. Rather than putting with strangers, we'd prefer to have him in the home of someplace he knows. Because keep in mind what we've done. We're saying this child is the victim of the abuse, and then we're going to remove him from everything he knows and put him with strangers.
Right.
That's obviously not the best thing to do. So if we can find a place where he's going to be comfortable with family, friends, or members, then that's the route we will take.
Okay. And then, if let's say a child is in placement, what is the role of the agency then? You mentioned services.
Okay. First of all, before we even get to the services, that would be when we would go to court and make a determination and have the court make a determination whether there's a continuing need for the child to be in placement. Because so far it sort of sounds like the agency's been making all of these decisions unilaterally. We haven't really. The judges involved from the initial placement, there is a initial hearing. We used to call them emergency hearings, but now we call them protective custody hearings, where there's a sort of a prima facie case that they need to stay in care. And then ultimately the dependency hearing before the judge, who determines that no, they still need to stay in care. So that determination's been made by the court. What's the goal of that placement? I would say probably 99.5% of the first goal is always reunification. That 0.5% or 1% are maybe a case where we've been previously involved with the family and they haven't done anything to make it better. Mm-hmm. And we may just say, we're not providing services, or the court may say we don't have to. But otherwise, the goal is reunification. What do we have to do to get the child back into the home? To determine what services, the very first question we have to ask is, what caused the abuse? Was it the stress of not having income and not being able to pay the bills? Was it an anger management problem? Was it a drug or alcohol problem? So the very first thing you need to do is try to identify, what caused it, and then try to deal with that issue. For example, if it's a drug and alcohol issue, the example I gave was mother was doing drugs, and as a result, he was left alone. Well, how do we resolve the problem to make him safe in the home? Work on the drug issue. So that means we're probably going to have a drug and alcohol evaluation. We're going to ask her to complete treatment, whatever the evaluation says. If the evaluation says she needs an inpatient drug and alcohol treatment, that's what we'll recommend to the court, and that's what will be put in the family service plan. If it's intensive outpatient therapy, whatever that is, to try to solve the problem that led to the initial abuse.
And you indicate to solve the problem because the goal of the agency is reunification.
Correct.
Which would be to have the child go back home.
Correct.
But you want to make certain that the child is safe.
Exactly.
For that to be done. And we only have a minute remaining right now. So let me ask, you gave me some statistics before we began the program. And I think you indicated that there's about 2,300 reports, 23,000 reports.
Correct.
In Pennsylvania, and that roughly 1,100 in York County each year.
That's correct.
Making York County the third highest county in the state after Philadelphia and Allegheny County.
That is correct.
And before you can comment anymore, we're out of time.
Okay.
So thank you for being our guest.
Thank you.
This was Legal Lines. My name is Tom O'Shea. My guest was Wanda Neuhaus today.